If you want to jump into a world full of other businesses and full of competitors, you have to find your niche. You have to find the unmet needs.
Our featured speaker today is the founder and CEO of Wabbani and president of Rupununi Learners Foundation, a U.S. nonprofit that partners with Cayman House in Guyana, an indigenous community-owned and operated social enterprise that's become the largest employer and consumer of local goods and services in its area. Alice, it's a great pleasure to have you back as our featured guest today. Thank you so much for sharing this leg of your journey with us.
Thank you for having me.
The pleasure really is ours. I do, kind of look at how people are doing on Facebook and LinkedIn, and I know that's not necessarily where you share all your updates, and it's been quite some time since we spoke. Can you kind of catch us up on how things are going with you and your organizations?
I think the last time we spoke, was it pre-COVID? I think it was pre-COVID.
It was like just into that, because we actually started this after lockdown. So it was, I think, like 6 months after that.
So Cayman House, which is in the Rupununi, so the name of my organization is Rupununi Learners Foundation. The Rupununi
Thank you
is a
for that.
region, I know, is a region of Guyana, and a Wabbani is a hunter's hide in a tree. Not to correct you, just to inform you. Wabbani, the company, is named after a hunter's hide in a tree. Why? Because villagers climb trees in the forest with bows and arrows and look down on the forest floor. And when you are up in the tree, you can take aim at prey that if you're on the ground, you will never see. It was really sort of a joke name because I think of the hunter's hide that they build, which is just a few planks in the tree, as a platform. And I said, that's right. We're going to give hand makers a platform whereby they can take aim at a market, because remote crafters have no access to markets except the few people who happen to stumble upon them, whether as tourists or villagers who may need something. So the whole goal there was to build a platform. But the last time we spoke, I guess, was the beginning of COVID. And of course, our income base is tourism, and COVID completely crashed tourism. There was no tourism. So our whole economic basis for existing was eliminated during COVID. And lockdown was taken very seriously in the Rupununi because they have so few defenses against illness. They don't have access, or at least they have better access now. But at the time, particularly, they didn't have a lot of access to medical care, certainly not up-to-date treatment, diagnosis, etc. There was no vaccine yet. So villagers basically went to their farms up the river in the forest, wherever they could get away from other people. So all of our operations suspended. And I think that's one of those great moments for entrepreneurs where you say, okay, I don't have a business now. What am I going to do? What we did, and what I like to think that is actually one of my talents as an entrepreneur, is I was able to see the opportunity where others see scarcity. In other words, I think that being a social entrepreneur in particular, where you're not competing in the market, you're finding niches, you're finding unoccupied niches in the market, because you're not going to be able to throw the kind of money at a problem or at marketing or merchandising that your competitors have, right? I'm a great believer in the blue ocean theory, right? That you don't want to be in the red ocean where everybody's eating each other. You want to swim to the blue ocean where there's nobody else. So what we did during COVID is we swam to the blue ocean and we said, if we have no tourists, that means we can make mess. We can make noise. We can do all these ugly activities that we never do, that we always put off when we have tourists. So what we're going to do is reinvest. So what we did during COVID was build. We got small groups of carpenters and roof thatchers, because all of our roofs are thatched. And we said, okay, let's build the stuff, let's improve the stuff, let's remodel the stuff that we keep saying we need to do that we never do because we have guests.
Makes a lot of sense.
If you can do it, right? If you can come up with the money, that's definitely a challenge. And it's also scary because when your whole business disappears, you think, oh, there's never going to be any money again. I mean, there's a little voice in your head going, what if we can't come back? So anyway, we reinvested and it's really paid off. We've improved so many things in the compound, and Wabbani, instead of existing as a couple of shelves in a guest house, is now a whole building and a whole set of studios. Once you create studio space, you want to fill the studio space. So we've expanded the arts that we do. We started only doing 3 crafts that were traditional crafts. We were innovating with basketry, with cotton weaving, and with clay. And we've expanded to block printing. And we just wrote a grant. We're going to find out like in the next 2 weeks if we got it, to really reinvest in pottery locally. Seeing scarcity as an opportunity, I think, is one of the key skills, probably of every entrepreneur, but definitely social entrepreneurs for the reasons I said. But that's how I've been.
Yeah, thank you. And especially during that time period too. Like you're right, there was so much uncertainty. So, spending money is kind of a scary prospect, even though the whole goal is still there, right? Of investing in the future of that community. So you had posed an interesting question or topic, however you want to look at it, that I'd love to dive into with you. So how do you see learning like an artist and learning to sell like an entrepreneur have translated into carrying into action that fosters social impact? There's a lot to unpack there. So I kind of wanted to hear your philosophy on this.
It's where I get my inspiration. Everybody gets their inspiration from their lives. I've realized more and more that my inspiration I've been trained to see by the artists I've enjoyed. And whether they are visual artists, literary artists, musical artists, the ones I've really embraced, even starting in childhood reading children's books, right? They've taught me how to see, and which I think is what artists do. They say, look at this, pay attention to this. And I often say that becoming someone who cares for others in whatever way you do just starts with noticing. You have to be a noticer. And artists help you be a noticer, to notice that black water has 40 colors in it. Monet taught us that. Or to notice, I think one of the reasons I love jazz, I discovered jazz as a teenager, is because it has you noticing emotions that you otherwise might not notice. It has you feeling things that I don't think you feel in other genres. That's true of every genre. Why do we like music? Why do we say put on X artist? Because we want to feel the set of emotions. One of the things I loved about jazz is that I felt that it was very good at elevating the hidden. Learning to notice, I think, is a key skill in general. As an entrepreneur, it's vital. Because as I said, if you want to jump into a world full of other businesses and full of competitors, you have to find your niche. You have to find the unmet needs. So you have to be a noticer. So you're not going to, particularly when you're starting out, you're not going to, I don't care how successful you get, you can't bludgeon people into buying your product, no matter how many ads you put on or whatever. You have to find the unmet needs. You have to find the niche. That's the selling part. But how do you find it? You find it by noticing. That's the artist part. So artists teach you to notice. There's a whole school of education and entrepreneurship about niches and developing niches and how you do that, right? There's lots of education on that. So that's really what I was referencing, that I think are the kind of the 2 things in play. But the third thing really is, once you notice, usually for me, it's notice. Well, in business and in social change, you're noticing a lack. You're noticing something that's missing. What's an unmet need in society? What's an unmet need in the marketplace? So you're noticing what's missing, and then you have to figure out, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to pay attention to? What am I going to put my energy into? I think a lot of that is accidental. So it's a factor of circumstance. Certainly for me being in Guyana, I was in Guyana because my husband was doing long-term research funded by the St. Louis Zoo. I wasn't there on any kind of mission. I was there And when we went for several reconnaissance sort of visits before we moved there, we lived there for 3 years. I was just talking to people, trying to understand the community. And that's when I learned that people struggled to read because they didn't have books. And I said, well, okay, I'll start a library. That's something I know how to do. I'll start a library. And it started with the library. It just started with trying to help people learn how to read by giving them access. Sorry about the dogs, giving them access to books. And that was just sort of the first step. But then I noticed that there was an eco lodge 12 miles upriver that had been, it was an old cattle ranch that had, the cattle business had died because the Brazilians outcompeted the Guyanese just in sheer
Oh,
volume,
okay.
right?
I didn't remember that part of the story. Okay.
Yeah. So the Rupununi is like one person per square mile. There are more, it's like Wyoming, there are more cows than people kind of thing.
Good comparison. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So that former cattle ranch had become an eco lodge. And we were friends with the woman who ran it. She was actually our first hostess because we didn't have a place to live when we first arrived. She helped us make a relationship with the village of Upakari. The Upakari built us a house. This is 2003, right? They were doing tourism. And our whole tourism venture started because she called us up over ham radio, which is all we had in those days. And she said, we have some tourists who won't leave. And, can we bring them to see what Peter's doing on the river at night? So what Peter, my husband, was doing was catching and releasing the top predator in South America so that he could mark it, tag it, and release it, right? Weigh
This
it,
part I
separate.
remembered because I found that
Right, right, right.
fascinating.
Oh,
Yeah.
so and we did it one night for her just to amuse visitors we had that she had run out of things to show them, right? And she called us up on the ham radio the next day and said, they said it was the best wildlife experience they ever had. And these are people who've been to Kenya and God knows where. Literally the light bulb formed over my head. Oh, we could be in this business. We could be partnering with her and providing this tour to her guests. And that's how it started. And then we built our own guest house. And now it's 40 other things, including Wabbani, a craft business, because when we built the guest house, I needed to find craftspeople. And I realized that just about every craftsperson was over the age of 40 and that there were no skills were not getting passed on. And that was really what inspired me to say, you know what? I need to pay attention to this. I need to pay attention to the fact we've got all these wonderful crafts that are just being left to die for good reasons. I mean, there's no money in it. You can't make a living at it, which is why I said, okay, let's start a business and see if we can make a living at it.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense to me too. Like, seeing that things weren't set up to be sustainable like that too. Because I mean, that's preserving their culture.
Which is exactly how they see it.
Yeah, that's part of, what I respect so much about like the way you've gone about building this kind of what looks like to me like a social enterprise kind of in that area.
Oh, it is. Everything I do is a social enterprise, i.e., it's not really viable in the market any other way.
Yeah, it's so specific to that people in that area. I love it. But I mean, really you have found that niche and I think it's a beautiful thing.
Well, now I'm trying to build on it, by the way. I'm trying to use what I've learned. I think this is important because you can build something very niche, but how can you have greater impact? You can be very effective in a small way. How can you take what you've learned and have greater impact? So people talk a lot about reproducible projects. What do they call that? Best practices, right? People talk about best practices, which I don't really believe in. I think that's BS. I think that's the desire to take people and make them replicable, but no individual is replicable. And the magic that happens in a community when people start to see their own potential and believe in their own futures, that's not replicable. You can't, no, that's built organically. That's built authentically, or it's just PR. Okay. So how do you have greater impact? And that's always been a needling question for me. And I'm working on something now which builds on what I learned in Guyana and tries to have impact on remote weavers, specifically weavers for now, everywhere, trying to solve a problem for us that I know is a problem for thousands of weavers across the world. I'm talking about handloom weavers, many of whom live in remote places. They don't have access to markets. These are often women, not always, but often women. Because weaving is piecework. You can start something and leave it and go change the baby and make dinner and come back to it. I mean, literally, you can go weed your garden and come back to it. And so weaving is something practiced all over the world, often by very poor people, often by very remote people, and their sales are really limited. So it's very hard for them to persuade anyone in the younger generation, hey, you want to do like I do. The younger generation is looking for other opportunities. But I'm a sentimentalist and I like handmade things. I think handmade things only become more valuable the more machine-made things we have. I'm trying to build a platform for weavers. But when I say a platform, it's a lampshade. So what I learned with the weaver, I'm just jumping right into something I'm working on, sorry. So I work with hammock weavers. So the Caribs, as in the word Caribbean, the Caribs are supposed to have invented the hammock, at least the Western Hemisphere hammock. So the thing about a hammock is it takes about 11, 12 pounds of cotton to make a good size hammock. And then, so you've got
That's
to
a lot of
grow it.
cotton. I never thought about that before.
You got to grow it, you got to clean it, you got to spin it, and then you have to put it on a loom, and then you have to weave it. And this whole process takes months. So you don't earn any. And then you have to find a buyer who can afford to pay you what you actually put into it. I thought to myself, okay, can we keep that whole hand making tradition? But can we produce something smaller that requires less cotton and that's faster to make? I started to develop this lampshade, and the lampshade presents all kinds of technical challenges, which we've solved some of. But lampshades are a $35 billion business globally and a growing business. Lampshades are growing 6% a year. Now, if you think of the last time you bought a lampshade, you might have got it online, but if you want to just go out of your house and buy a lampshade, you go to Target or Lowe's or, one of those places, maybe Walmart. And what you're buying a fixed thing. It's one shape, one size. It's unrecyclable. It's almost impossible to clean. I mean, you can get away with vacuuming and dusting it for a while. You can try washing it, but basically, at some point, you're going to just chuck it. And it's just landfill. So I thought, okay, I mean, to me, the lampshade is ripe for improvement. Talk about noticing. Okay, so you notice that the lampshades in your house, at least the fabric ones, right, are just a disaster ecologically. And they sort of have a built-in obsolescence because they're very hard to clean. If you move them, very hard to move. You got to put each one in its own, you got to put them in a box or, they're going to get damaged.
Right. One of those things that's when you're packing and moving house is kind of a pain in the butt. Yeah.
Oh, it is. And that's also when you notice how filthy it is. So is when you're moving and you go, forget it, I'm just going to buy a new lampshade. So the lampshade is ripe for disruption, is what I would say. I think we can make a flat packed biodegradable frame. It can be adjustable, which means that weavers who weave in different fibers and even women weavers who weave in the same fiber, when you're using a hand spun and woven item, everybody's is slightly different. So your lampshade is going to be a 1/4 inch tighter than my lampshade just because of how humid it was when I spun my thread.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Good point.
So the lampshade has to be adjustable. So that's challenging. It has to be adjustable. It ought to be flat packable. It ought to be biodegradable. And if you can match the modular loom with the modular frame, now you've created a platform that any weaver in the world can weave for. So a $35 billion market now becomes possible for someone who's weaving in Nepal or weaving in Burkina Faso or weaving in Guyana, because now they know exactly what to make. And the plans for the loom are on their phone. You can make a downloadable blueprint that is local materials, local tools. So now anyone in the world can download the blueprint for the frame, for the loom, weave something that's going to fit. The lampshade can be is flat packable, can be sold anywhere, and hopefully fabricated anywhere. I want it to be made out of cardboard. Whether that's actually going to happen is something else. But cardboard is my laminated layers of cardboard is my material of choice. And if anybody's listening and wants to work on this, I would love to work with you.
I know I wouldn't put it past artists. I see,
I would love it.
all sorts of furniture constructed out of things that I never would have thought. So
And here's
that's
the
awesome.
warning: I am not going to patent it. Don't try to patent it. The whole point of this is give it away. I think of it a little bit like when, Steve Jobs decided that he was going to give away the IP for the App Store, right? He was just going to say, let everybody build apps for the iPhone, right? I'm saying let everybody weave for this loan. Let everybody weave, and let's create a diversity of lampshades. Let's create a way that weavers know exactly what to make, because not only are they far from a market, but even if you open up a market, like tourism opens up a market for remote communities, right? They don't know what to make. Now, I'm not saying the lampshade is the first thing they should make, because tourists aren't generally looking for lampshades, but you can create a table lantern and offer it for sale in a remote community, and a tourist will look at that and say, yeah, I can put that on my dining table. I can put that in next to my bed. The lampshade is a bit of a stretch as a tourist object.
I think it's fascinating though, because people are always looking for something to take home with them. And often they get some sort of, tchotchke thing that they may or may not display. It might wind up at
It's a
Goodwill,
dust
you
collector.
know.
It's a dust collector.
Yeah. Well, this is a dust collector, but it's a useful one.
Right. So the ladies in the village where I spent my time, if you ask them what they would make for people, they would make a baby sling. So they carry babies in a mini hammock around themselves, right? But I don't think they're not that well made. They're very quickly made. They're not that well made. And as a tourist, you look at it and go, I don't know, what am I going to do? Hang my bananas up to ripen in this? I don't know what I'm going to do with this. They might make a little purse kind of thing. It wouldn't be very well sewn by our standards. So what can we do, right, that gives them a platform that is uniquely theirs, that shows their strengths and opens up the market to them? Well, that's the idea. And I'm not saying this is the be all end all idea. I'm using it as an example.
Well, you had done panels that fit like
For doors.
different furniture and stuff too to customize it. So, I
And
love
we've
that you're
gotten
kind of
some, yeah,
thinking that way. Yeah.
it's all about how can you take traditional craft, keep it authentic, right? You're not changing what they do. The lampshade is exactly like the hammock. It's woven with the same cotton, it's hand spun in the same way. It's just a different format for presenting the same skills and the same materials. And the same thing was true with the doors. The doors basically took baskets and said, well, let's take away the edge of the basket, which is the most vulnerable in shipping, and also the part that is the hardest to learn. So basketry becomes particularly exclusive in a community because relatively few people get good enough to make a really nice, perfect rim of a basket. But a lot of people can learn how to weave the flat bottom of the basket. So what could we do with the flat bottom of the basket that was sort of democratized basketry sales, and it became door panels? And we've actually there's a hotel that's opening in a week or something in Georgetown, Guyana, that has the walls of its dining room are our panels and the walls of its reception area are our panels.
Oh, how neat. Okay.
So that's going to be the first public space that has our
That's
work
going to
in
be
it.
so exciting for those artisans too, to know
Well,
that,
they'll never see it, but
and know
I'll send them photographs. I mean, it's
well,
in the
I was gonna
capital.
say no, yeah, no, though that's so many people are going to like walk by their work is kind of like having it, in a nondescript location in a city. You know how cities post art around. I don't know.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, we'll see what
So
happens. We'll see what happens.
yeah. Oh, thank you so much though. Because I mean, we love asking people kind of like what's next. And you answer that in such a cool way. I also really kind of going back to the people, that I know that you have such a heart for. How do you feel like the country of Guyana and like the need that you originally saw in the community has really changed since you began serving them? I kind of mean like, in a governmental sense as well, because I know some of
Well, let's not
those
talk
things are the
politics. Their politics are as toxic as our politics.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking
They
like,
have a completely toxic political situation.
sure, okay. Well, every country's flourishing and growing in a multitude of ways. So you can kind of, take the other branches if you want to, but I can see how bringing opportunities for people to be educated, for them to all be readers now could really transform a community. So how has that kind of changed what you want to see there?
My biggest achievement is that I don't run it anymore. That's what I love. What I love is that everybody else is doing it. So I may have used this analogy the last time we talked, but I think of it kind of like a parade. So, at the front of the parade is the drum majorette or major, right? Whoever that person is called. And they're leading the parade and they don't look back usually. They're just walking and everybody's following, right? And in the beginning, that's what you are as the entrepreneur or the social entrepreneur. That you're saying, okay, I've got an idea, folks, follow me. And then what I say is, I have moved further and further and further to the back to the point where I'm sweeping up after the elephants. Okay. You start out leading, and if you're lucky, you relinquish control, even input, and stuff starts happening because people say, you know what, we like walking in this direction. And we don't need a drum major to show us where we're going. And if we decide to go somewhere else, we can go somewhere else. And you're just in the back supporting, sometimes people turn to you and say, hey, we need to write this grant, or we need to find pilot funding for this, or we're trying to make a decision about something. What do you think? And I'm there. I'm there in the background to support. But the thing I'm proudest of is it runs without me. They don't even talk about it. You've got it. That's the best. It's like, so, my first graduate degree was in social work. And in social work, they talk about doing for, doing with, and doing by. That very often you start out doing things for people. Your goal is to try to do things with people. And once you're doing things with people, you really want people to do it doing by. You want them to do it on their own. And I would say pretty much that's how you know if you're helping. You know if you're helping if you're working yourself out of a job. If you're creating a permanent place for yourself, you're not helping. Which I think is why people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and all these folks talk about giving away all their money in their lifetime. It's like, do what you're going to do and get out of the way.
No,
Pass
I
it
think it's a
on.
really wise point that a lot of us don't think about quite enough. Hi there. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you mind leaving us a review, a like, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform? Thanks so much. That really helps our reach. The Founders Voyage podcast is now proudly sponsored by VidOps. Kane at VidOps has been taking care of our editing since early 2024. He works efficiently, and I'm sure you'll agree that he does a great job. Thank you to VidOps for helping bring this podcast to life. If you want the same great support we're getting for your podcast, or you need help with video, photography, or animation, you can get 10% off at vidops.io using our referral code Voyage. That's vidops.io, referral code Voyage. Now back to the show. I think you're kind of answering this, but at this point in your journey, how do you measure success for yourself?
I really don't. I don't think about success. I really don't. I think about what am I going to do today? What are long-term goals I'm working? I certainly think about long-term, medium-term, short-term, and getting up in the morning and keeping all those perspectives in mind. You want to get the short-term, you want to get your checklist done. You also want to keep the next thing moving, and you want to keep your eye on, building the global platform for weavers, not just your weavers, right? So I don't think about success for myself. I mean, Churchill, that problematic fellow, Churchill said that his definition of success was failure after failure without loss of enthusiasm. So I am a great success by Churchill's definition because I am always enthusiastic. I'm always saying, yeah, it could be better. It could be different. It could have more impact. It could nurture the next generation. It could, let's find the talent and recruit it and see what they do. The best part is when people take things away from you and make them their own. It's like teaching your kid how to bake cookies, and then one day you come in and the cookies are baked. And they're different from the cookies you taught them to make. And you go, wow, those are great cookies. How did you think of that? Well, I saw this recipe, or I ate this thing and I thought, well, that could be I ate this great muffin and I thought, well, that could be a cookie. And I thought I'd come home. And then you've got a baker, right? Because they're not baking with you anymore. So that's success.
I completely agree with you. Yeah, I was saying kind of already answered it because I think without calling it success, you said like, that you're really helping people if you've worked yourself out of a job, which you have done. I do see that like we have this need as human beings to feel like we're, still kind of pushing the bar. So I love that have this project and you're seeing this problem within the world, and letting yourself kind of expand your lens outside this community that you've been serving for so long.
So we started by talking about art. So I'll mention a piece of art that is an inspiration for me, or it doesn't inspire me. It expresses how I feel about what we're talking about. So are you guys familiar with Sir Percival or the story of Parsifal?
Possibly.
Right, you know it. So Parsifal is a German poem that was turned into an opera by Wagner. That's how we know Parsifal. But Parsifal is the same dude as Sir Percival of the Round Table. And there are stories about Percival in Welsh, in French, in German, in English. He's an object of myth like Arthur, and it's one of the Arthurian legends like Lancelot. Okay, so Percival. So Percival is this country boy, and these questing knights come into his neighborhood, and he's utterly captivated by these knights. And he decides to leave his little rural hamlet, and he follows the knights. And he winds up following them to the court of King Arthur. And this is the Fisher King story. Arthur is wounded, and they're trying to heal Arthur's uncurable wound. And they go in quest of the Grail, because the Grail has this life-giving elixir that will heal the Fisher King. And by the way, the land is dying as well, right? So as Arthur declines, the land has famine, and blah, blah, blah. Percival decides to go on this quest. And Percival actually finds the Grail. And there's a lot to this. But anyway, Percival actually finds the Grail. But when he goes to grasp it, a voice asks him a question. And the question is, whom does the Grail serve? This booming voice. And Percival doesn't know the answer. I think he doesn't say anything. I think he's just dumbstruck. And the Grail disappears, and Percival is shot into some lightning out in the field, and he spends 20 years getting back to that place. He finds the Grail again. And the voice says, whom does the Grail serve? And 20 years older and wiser, Percival says, it serves you, Lord. Now, you have to realize, I am not religious, okay? This is not a religious statement to me. This is the idea of the other, but the only way you can fulfill your purpose is by dedicating it to something bigger than yourself. And as long as you're trying to own it, it will stay small.
I think that's a really wise point.
Whom does it serve? The money, the attention, the opportunity, the credit, fill in your blank. Whom does it serve? It has to serve something else. If you want it to serve you, it's only going to be as big as you unless you're in bamboozle. If you're a great bamboozler, then maybe for a while you will succeed in persuading people that you are the be all end all. I would say for this kind of work, the trick is, how do you make it work for others? How do you make it serve others? How do you make it expand the lives of others? Because then they'll keep it going and they'll find things to do that you never dreamed of. That's the most exciting part.
That is the most exciting part. As you said, like the spin on the cookie recipe, right? That makes it unique. I actually want to pass to another community member who's listening, who has a question for you.
Thanks for sharing the great insights, and your stories were very fascinating about how you made business affordable for many poor people. I was very interested while you were speaking. I had a very quick question. If you have any advice that you can share on how to identify the right opportunity to make the type of business really affordable for everyone. Thanks a lot.
So The most successful entrepreneur that I've ever known personally, not read about, but known personally, his words of wisdom to me were niches are riches. Find the niche or niche. Find the niche where there's the unmet need, where there is something unsatisfying, and go for it. And then use the tools of entrepreneurship with customer discovery and interviewing and experimenting and pivoting and all that good stuff we all know about in the studies of entrepreneurship. Do it small and look for those unmet needs. And, they're all around us. They're all around us. And again, that's why I said artists teach us to see. So it starts with seeing the unmet need for the consumer, the unmet need for the artist, for the artisan or the community member, but especially in the United States, and I don't know where you are, Giovanni, but especially in the United States, we have every possible resource we could possibly need. And we have waste lying all around us. So the opportunity to make change is constantly with us. The opportunity to make improvement is constantly with us. We just have to see it. So I like to use the example of Mr. Reese, who worked for Mr. Hershey. So Hershey's chocolate, right, is like the biggest chocolate brand in the United States. And a guy named Reese, Reese, worked for Mr. Hershey. And he didn't particularly like working for Mr. Hershey, and he wanted to start his own business. And he would bring back home from the factory the broken chocolate, the dirty chocolate, the unsellable chocolate from the factory. And he would put it in his wife's popover pan, which is like a muffin tin, a particular kind of muffin tin. And he would throw the pieces in his wife's muffin tin and he would melt them in the oven. And then he would start combining the chocolate with other flavors. Kind of reminds me of how Edison invented the filament in the light bulb, right? He tried 10,000 filaments and gas combinations before. So Mr. Reese figured out that if you put peanut butter with chocolate, that was pretty good. And that's like the number one selling candy in the United States, maybe the world. So he just did it. He had the popover pan and he had the chocolate and the peanut butter existed already. What he did is he found a way to put them together and get people excited. And I think the Reese family still gets royalties from this chocolate from the Hershey Company. Anyway.
Really?
So it's a
I'll
huge
look that story up. I didn't know that.
Well, it's a great story. I've probably garbled it a bit, but it's a great story. So we have the materials of innovation all around us. It's just taking the chocolate and finding the peanut butter. And by the way, if you've ever noticed, Reese's cups the only candy that has that fluted bottom with the paper on it, and that's because it was invented
now
in
that
a muffin
you say
tin.
That, it makes so much sense to me. Yeah.
It was invented in a muffin tin, and they have kept that format ever since he borrowed his wife's muffin tin. So the resources of innovation are all around us. In the United States, particularly, they're everywhere. What are you going to do and why are you going to do it? What need are you going to meet? Oh, while you're looking up the story of Mr. Reese, look up the story of Girl Scout cookies. Because the Girl Scouts wanted summer camps and nobody wanted to give them the money for summer camps. And what did they have? The girls knew how to run bake sales, and the girls had a woman in their community who had a great cookie recipe. And that's what they used. Everybody was interested in the Boy Scouts. Nobody was interested in the Girl Scouts.
It still works.
It still works. Yeah. So the Girl Scouts used what they had, which was girly things like baking cookies and bake sales and going door to door. And who can say no to the little girl in pigtails standing at your door selling you cookies? No, very hard to say no to that little girl. They used what they had. So use what you have to tackle the problem you want to tackle. And the two can be connected. I think it's easier if they're connected. I think people understand the story better if the innovation and the beneficiary are connected. But I mean, there are people who just, they start a company and then they give the money to such and such cause. And you can do that. I would rather engage the target folks in the process of business because then they take those skills in 1,000 directions on their own. I don't really want to create a beneficiary. I want to create a participant. There are as many ways to do social enterprises, there are social entrepreneurs. So I'm not saying like I have some recipe. I'm sharing my recipe. Now go out and bake your own cookies.
Yeah, no, I love it. And, you have so many little tidbits you've come to. I know you're a person that's continued to educate yourself throughout this entire process. Do you feel like there was a time though when you saw something going one way and you had to make like a major pivot or deviate from your plan? And I guess my question is, what did you wind up doing? And looking back, is there anything you would change, or do you feel like, that went the way it was supposed to, and this has just really grown me as a person?
Well, I think, as I said, my definition of success is failure after failure. So there's been lots of failures. Lots of failures. I mean, I thought that the door panels would be easier as a sell than they have been. They really haven't been successful to the consumer. They've been successful in a decorative arts market to architects and designers, not to the home buyer. So that was a failure. I mean, I could go into my failures, but I think it's just learning. You fail and you learn and you say, okay, that didn't work. Let's do something else. The thing about when you're working with low income people is they have to go where the money is. So if you start to fail in one area, you start to lose your followers who go, I can't put my time into this. So you come up with something else that helps them earn income, or you try. Failure is another way of saying learning. And you just keep doing it as long as you can. I mean, and sometimes you run out of money or you run out of road and you have to stop. But until you have to stop, keep learning, keep failing, in other words.
Absolutely. No, and I appreciate you kind of have given yourself that permission, realizing well, we're just going to have to pivot. We're going to have to figure out, that next pivot that makes this work.
Absolutely. And I think, by the way, every business works that way. That's why there's always, quote, new products. Companies are always looking for the next opportunity to compensate for the fact, well, nobody's eating mayonnaise anymore, so we're going to have to turn it into something else. Let's make a new product.
Yeah, there's a lot of that with mayonnaise. I don't even understand it. Yeah.
I know mayonnaise is, when I was a kid, mayonnaise was a staple, and now people aren't eating mayonnaise, which is probably all to the good. And the mayonnaise companies have had to come up with other ways of selling products. So new generally comes from failure.
It is really interesting to see how those things evolve. There's a question we like to close with, and you can kind of take this in whatever direction you like. What words of wisdom might you want to leave us with today? You've given us a lot, so it could be anything.
There's lots of little, nuggets, niches or riches, and blah blah blah. Read Blue Ocean Theory. I think you kindly appended leverage points. We haven't talked about leverage points. You kindly appended the leverage points, which is the last chapter of the book Thinking in Systems, and it's a online. You can get it anywhere. It's a free PDF. You can read the last chapter. I find that incredibly useful in terms of looking at how do you make change, where do you start, what do you shoot for. I think leverage points is a brilliant flash of insight about that. So I really recommend it. I guess, whom does it serve? What can you dedicate yourself to and put yourself in the service of? But I say that knowing that it's a journey, and that if you start this journey when you're young, it's inevitably going to be about you. It's going to be about you on the quest. And who am I? And where's my horse? And I'd like some nice shiny armor, please. And a handsome horse. It's going to be about you, but the ultimate destination is not you. And you have to find your way there if you really want to lift up others. But it took Percival 20 years. You're allowed to take 20 years, because it took Percival 20 years, and he was better than any of us.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Alice, for making time for us today. We really do appreciate everything you've shared with us and taught us today. And thank you, Giovanni, everyone joining us live and listening to this after. We appreciate you bringing your energy and perspectives to these discussions. Spencer and I and the team behind Founders Voyage feel really fortunate to be part of this community with you. and for the opportunity to bring you cooperative learning experiences each week. And we'd love to hear nominations for future Saturday interview guests and nominations for topics for our topical conversations. You can listen to our edited podcast under Founders Voyage on your favorite podcast platform or directly on our website, foundersvoyage.org. So much for sharing, and we wish you all the best on this next leg of your journey.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone. Have a great day.
You've just finished another episode of Founders Voyage, the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.